Hello, I'm Maddy Harland from Permaculture magazine, and I founded this YouTube channel back in the midst of time. Over the years, it's been my real privilege to interview some very, very special people, and in this interview, I'm back with Manda Scott. Manda's just an extraordinary polymath, really. She's trained as a veterinary surgeon, worked at Newmarket, began writing crime novels, and then had an experience that took her into writing the Boudicca series. She's written many, many novels, most recently an extraordinary novel called Only Human Power. But my connection with her came through her podcast, which is called Accidental Gods, which is the most wonderful exploration of so another world is still just possible, and if so, how do we find the pathways to a generative and positive future? Because unless we have a pathway, how do we find a destination? We'd be stumbling around. So she, over some years, she's now talked to an extraordinary collection of people. And recently I was in conversation with Manda, and I just thought, we are in this time of enormous disruption and change, politically, ecologically, economically, socially. Everything seems to be breaking down. So I do ask her to explain concepts like the metacrisis. And so please bear with us while we just set the ground for this conversation, because what I really wanted to hear from Manda was, what are the ways in which we as ordinary human beings and individuals and small communities, how do we find our pathway, our sense of agency, our empowerment, our activism, and our inspiration and resources to continue visualizing and being in a process of creating this very different world in a time of unraveling. That's really the essence of what I wanted to hear, and to create something that I hope you'll find really uplifting. And as I asked these questions that I'd really wanted to ask her for some time, I felt this real sense of energy rising and uplift. And I was really delighted in comparing notes after we finished that Manda did too. So this is our conversation, and I hope you find it inspiring, useful, and as erudite as I did, because I find her clarity and capacity to express complex concepts in a succinct way quite marvellous. Thank you for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel, of course. So, welcome, Manda, to Permaculture magazine YouTube. I'm so grateful that you managed to squeeze us in your busy week life.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and one day I will settle my life down. But thank you. It's a great honor to be
don't
invited.
settle your life down. It's very interesting and productive and stimulating for the rest of us. So I wanted to talk to you today about where we are in terms of the world. Great sweeping, grandiose subjects, but we'll drill down. And I wanted to start with some real basics, if we may. So one of the buzzwords of the moment is polycrisis, and I wondered if we could start by summarising what this is for the people who've locked up on our channel, who might be expecting us to talk about smallholding or comfrey.
Okay. Smallholder and comfrey are
Very
intimately and
important.
intricately involved in the polycrisis, or sometimes called the metacrisis.
Yes.
And the principle of that is that we live in a complex, actually a hyper complex system, which is to say nothing is linear. No, very little is linear. The things people create are sometimes linear, but mostly any living system, particularly ecosystems, are complex, which is to say nothing. They don't act in a linear fashion where you pull lever A and event B is guaranteed to happen. More likely, you pull lever A and a whole bunch of rippling things happen that are very hard to predict. And that we have the astonishing privilege to live at the time when the results of our culture and the extract, consume, destroy, pollute value set has created the mother of all crises. So we're in ecosystem collapse. We're in hitting climate tipping points where within this year it is very likely that the non-human carbon sources, particularly methane from permafrost, will exceed human production. So even if we zero the production, it's going to carry on rising. And industrial level pollution, not just polyfluoroalkylated substances in the rain, forever chemicals in the rain, or dead zones in the ocean, or microplastics in our bodies, and we still don't know how they're passing the blood-brain barrier, all of those. But the totality of everything we throw away ends up in the air, the water, or the land. And we've been throwing stuff away for a long time. And we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, which are currently being dismantled in real time, and technology of gods, and that's meeting as well, so that the AI is at a point where it's beginning to lie to us to maintain its own sense of what it's there for, which is freaking out quite a lot of AI engineers quite badly. So we're at a technological boundary where the technology that we have created with a, I would say, dysfunctional value system is beginning to really have repercussions. And we're in the collapse of liberal democracy, which is a result, direct result of the inequities of a predatory death cult capital system. So everything that we've been doing in the trauma culture is coming home to roost all at once. And they're coming home to roost all at once because they're all coming home to roost at once. Each is triggering off the others, is creating a multiplicity of tipping points. And therefore, linear options to change will not work. So geoengineering, for instance, the only thing you can say with absolute certainty about geoengineering is that it will make things worse. So we need then, we'll get onto this, I'm sure, but basically we need total systemic change, and it needs to be predicated on a systemic shift in our values.
Something that I've been, fantastic, thank you. Something that I've been looking at is the, I've just been aware of for years, is the Doomsday Clock, which is just ticked 1 second closer to midnight. So for those of you listening who might not know much about it, it was founded in 1945 by Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and the University of Chicago scientists who helped develop the first atomic weapons in the Manhattan Project. And they collectively were called the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and they created this idea of the Doomsday Clock 2 years later, using the imagery of the apocalypse, which is midnight, and the contemporary idiom of nuclear explosion or countdown to zero, to convey the threat to humanity and the planet. And it's set every year by the Bulletin of Science and Security Board in consultation with its sponsors, which include 9 Nobel laureates. So the clock has become a sort of universally recognized indicator of the world's vulnerability. And it's exactly as you were talking about. It's the vulnerability not only of nuclear risk, but of climate change, as they call it. I would call it sort of chaos or crisis, and disruptive technologies, which they directly state as including AI. So,
Right.
we're beginning to move towards an understanding that AI is a Pandora's box that has been opened.
Yeah.
So the world is perilously close to the precipice, and even a single second is of the most profound consequences. So with we are going to move on to sunshine and generative thinking, but I really want to set the scene because so often I think we're afraid of facing the very, very difficult things in life. And this goes from our personal wounding and how we
Yeah.
are in the world up to the sort of macro systems of wounding and dysfunction. And I
Yeah.
think one of the secrets or the things that we really need to heal and unpack is how to be able to look at the most difficult things in life and still maintain our integrity and wholeness. So bear with me, dear listeners and viewers, because
We're
I
going to do a
want to go to
theory
the
where we
bad
go
stuff. Yes,
down
I
and
want
then
to
we
do
go
the
up.
lovely,
Yeah.
swoop down and then up. So in your view, having done this amazing Accidental Gods podcast, which has covered so many solution-based, incredibly positive subjects and invited some of the most inspiring people I've really listened to. I mean,
Thank you.
really amazing. It's sort of thing, if you're paranoid, get up and you're awake at 4 a.m, switch on
Go listen
Accidental
to an
Gods, and
episode.
you'll go back to
Thank you.
sleep like a happy baby. How do you see us best preparing for adaptation and collapse?
Good question. We do the healing individually and collectively, and I'm beginning to understand that if we can do it well, that means ancestral healing, but I think that it means different things to different people, and I mean it in a very specific context. Because, as you said, the trauma of our culture is a mirror of the trauma inside. Every one of us who can thaw the frozen parts. So Thomas Hubel has a metaphor where trauma is a moment frozen in time. And when we get triggered, when that trauma evokes a trauma response, it's because something has happened that our system perceives to be similar to the thing that froze. And and we can only become healed, whole, healing, generative people if we thaw those parts and allow the flow of clarity to come through us. And I think that's the single most important thing anyone can do is really do the inner work to thaw out the bits that are frozen and to work on how do we do that not just as isolated individuals, but how do we build communities of healing, communities of people who are dedicated to the act of healing. And what happens if 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, a million of us were really to do that? The ripple effects out would be enormous. And I think it seems to me, certainly where I am just now, that if we give ourselves the inner space to be, to have that sense of being, becoming, belonging, and connect to the web of life, because I think that's an integral thing. Is once we start to thaw, the capacity to step into our birthright as interconnected nodes in the web of life becomes more possible. And then we ask the web, what do you want of me? Instead of our head minds frantically having to have the answer. And the combination of the thawing so that we can listen and then we can act together and as collectives is the only way we get through, I think. Our culture has told us that we basically cut ourselves off at the head, and given the linearity, the linear thinking of our head minds, total hegemony, and trained us from childhood that the only way we succeed is if our head minds are able to plot a course, know where we're going, know why we're going, and know how to get there. Everything, generations upon generations that this is what you do. You set a goal and you get there. And the people who climb the highest up a very steep-sided pyramid are the people who get to their goals fastest, without any consideration of the impact on anything else. What happens if we give our heads a break, take away the responsibility, thank God that's not what my head mind is actually for. My heart mind connects to the web of life. My head mind, then once I've asked what do you want of me, my head mind then kicks in to work out how to do what I'd been asked to do. So I think the inner work is by far the most important. Really fundamentally, this is a paraphrase of something Einstein said, but no problem is solved from the mindset that created it. We have to get out of the trauma culture mindset that tells us we're in a zero-sum game and scarcity, separation, and powerlessness are the foundation of the universe, and the human drive to individuality and personal greed is the reality, and it's not. We are pro-social beings who are designed to connect, and we will not heal the wounds inside unless that connection happens. But in the healing the wounds inside, that connection happens. So that we move out of scarcity, separation, powerlessness into connection, agency, and sufficiency. But that comes from healing, thawing the frozen parts, getting the clarity of energetic flow, connecting to the living web in a way that is absolutely real, and offering ourselves in service to life.
How do you have a sort of picture of these communities of healing? What shape are they, or do you have a sense of how that could be as a potential?
I think there's probably 8.5 billion answers to that. But I am watching communities of place and more of purpose and passion arising around these. So we live at a particular moment in time where, you and I are, if we are walking, many days apart. If we are driving, it's still going to be a half a day's drive. And yet we're talking in real time. You could be in Australia and we'd still have the potential to talk in real time. This is the first generation where I could look you in the eye and talk with you. And with the shamanic work we've done, we've discovered that genuinely things where I thought you had to be lying down, shoulder to shoulder, holding hands, physical contact, we've discovered that actually it works perfectly well with me in the UK and someone in Australia. So we are discovering what it is to have the capacity genuinely to connect, and it's not the same as in-person connection. But there are aspects of it that really work. So I think there are communities building that are what I would call communities of place, or the ones, who's in walking distance or cycling distance, who can I get to without fossil fuels, basically. Then there are the communities of purpose and of passion, and they are beginning to arise with the explicit intention of healing. And with people leading them, not just me, who are really aware and dedicated to creating healing at scale. That one-to-one therapist client or coach and client or mentor and client is a really good thing, and that can still continue. Elder and apprentice, that's fantastic. But we're at the metacrisis. Things are happening very, very fast. We need to be healing at scale, and the internet at the moment allows us to do that. If what's happening in the US means that we can't do that anymore, then I think we have to find other ways to connect. But that's, at the moment, this is good. And I think Thomas Hubel is doing it. There's groups in internal family systems. Bob Faulkner is really looking at how do we heal at scale. I'm sure there are lots of other groups doing it. We're doing it with an Accidental Gods. I'm planning things of just how can we connect with the people who are wanting to do the work. There are plenty who don't even know the work exists, and it's not part of their priority, and that's completely fine. This isn't something where you can sit someone down and say, you have to do this. It has to grow from inside. The yearning to do this has to become one of the most important things in your life. But if it is, how do we connect? Maybe we could do it through Permaculture magazine. How do we connect with the people who really want to do the inner work and give them the tools to do it in connection with other people who have the tools to do it? And then you can share ideas and thoughts, because one of the things we do best as people is encourage each other, celebrate each other's successes, hold each other in the vulnerable places when it's not going so well. And a cat always helps, obviously.
The cat comes in at very important moments.
He really does. And it's really odd. When I'm here on my own, he hardly ever comes up. But as soon as I'm talking to somebody, you're right, he picks the moments and he has to just come and tread all over my keyboard. So yeah.
And the cat is slightly helped me to lose my linear thread. So,
It's very,
blessings on the cat. No, no, it's a good
very,
thing. So, something that I want to pinpoint is regenerative is the buzzword of our times, really. But you always drop the RE and tend to speak of generative thinking, generative processes, etc. And I wonder if you would just like to enlarge on that a little bit, because I think I know the reason behind that, but it would be good to hear
thank you. Yes,
what
really
you're
good question.
thinking.
Yes. So this is partly I'm a writer. It's what I am and who I am, what I do, and language really matters. There's a wonderful
Well, language
Oscar Mira
manifests
Quesada.
form, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. So Oscar Mira Quesada, consciousness creates matter, language creates reality, ritual creates relationship. It's that encapsulates so much.
Mm.
So for a long time, our buzzword in our this culture was sustainable.
Mm.
But sustainable, really, when you parse it out, means doing slightly less harm while continuing with business as usual.
Mm.
We're going to carry on the predatory capital death cult. We'll keep racing on and we'll keep having to grow. The markets will still exist, but we'll do the odd bit of greenwash, which is absolutely no longer tenable at all. Regenerative began to mean repairing the harm. And it's still very head based. It's still basically linear. It's still, can we set some goals? Can we make our spreadsheet look a little bit more upward instead of downward, or outward instead of inward? And it was co opted by aspects, particularly in this country, of big ag. We had regenerative agriculture, which in the States is quite clearly defined as no input agriculture and no till, no input. And over here, there are people who call themselves regenerative farmers, and it's minimal tillage with glyphosate.
Mm.
And they still call it regenerative because they're not actually ploughing and they're not putting quite as much Roundup on the land as they were. And that's really toxic. And I don't want to be part of that. And for me, then, but I still think regenerative as a concept of
Renewal.
a donut city or something, where we're going to make our city create more biodiversity and offer more, I hate this phrase, ecosystem services than were there on the land before. It's better than nothing. But generative for me is a heart-based, connected. It has generous. It has so generosity of spirit, generosity of connection. It has generation as in the generational growth as growth, and it has generation as in we are one of many generations in time from past to present to future. So it feels as if it embodies more connection. It's got that sense of the seed germ and the healing and the being and becoming and belonging that we need to hold ourselves presencing while we do the healing that we need. So it just feels a more appropriate adjective and word than any of the others. Doubtless it'll be co-opted by someone at some point, and we'll have to find something else. But at the moment, it works for me.
Thank you. So I just want to take myself back at just think, before we had this conversation, I was thinking about the last 30 odd years of work, and many people like myself have been trying to raise awareness about what Joanna Macy called the great unraveling. And I really feel now that this is the time of unraveling, and it is firmly upon us. But I still have a sense of what she called the great turning too, the turning away from in this destructive industrialized culture as we know it, and that the doorway of transformation still has a crack of light. So
Yes.
I think many of us are holding the tension of this dichotomy. And I'm just wondering, when you hold tension, it can either be really focusing and creative, and just before an emergent space occurs, or
Yeah.
it can be quite tiring. And I wondered if you had anything you wanted to say about how we can energetically power up.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
So maybe I'll be
Yeah, yeah.
specific. How do we
No, no.
stay focused, balance, and create that sense of agency in ourselves, but in our communities of healing, whatever shape they may
Yeah,
take?
yeah, really good question. So this is possibly stepping a little bit outside the remit of permaculture, but I am of the opinion that we are spirits in a human body. I think that's well within everybody's purview. The bit that we can grasp with our intellect is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of who we are. And the gates to connecting with all that we are, which is an integral part of the web of life, are within our choice in any given moment. We can choose to get shut down, and fear shuts us down, rage shuts us down, despair shuts us down, all of the things that obviously shut us down, close those connections, and we become more and more and more, I would say, dense and less able to go with the flow of the great turning, which is wholly unpredictable. I think Ilya Prigogine was a nuclear chemist, so he was quite left brain and quite materialistic, but his concepts of systems change were relevant. And he said when any system reaches maximal complexity, it hits a bifurcation point, and it either crashes into chaos and extinction, or it emerges into a new system. And we're here. I mean, explicitly here in early February 2025, we are watching liberal democracy being sledgehammered to pieces in real time, quite deliberately, by people who did signal ahead of time that's exactly what they were going to do. And yet liberal democracy was taking us over the edge of the cliff. Liberal democracy is what got us into the metacrisis. It was never fully democratic. It was never fully liberal. It just had a gloss over the surface. A friend of mine, Ginny Servant-McLaughlin, who has an amazing book called Pedagogies of Collapse, totally wrong, and Bloom's, to give them credit, have put it, the PDF, free on their website. And she says, we have binary elections with two choices, and one is the neoliberals waving a pride flag and have a BLM badge, and the other is the neoliberals who, she didn't say this, but currently basically doing Nazi salutes and waving a swastika. It was still the predatory capital death cult. It just had a smiley face, or it didn't. And we needed that not to be there. And if anyone on the progressive side had taken a sledgehammer to it, there'd have been a military coup within literally hours of them doing that. So it's not pretty, and it's going to do a lot of people a lot of damage. And the nice, smooth descent that we all wanted when I was at Schumacher is not happening. But that system needed to go. That's not entirely what you asked. But in every given moment, we have a choice. We can close up, we can open out, we can move into higher sympathetic vagal overtones, or we can move into parasympathetic, rest and digest, relax, all of those things. And they are the places where we are most creative, the parasympathetic, the opening, and from which our heart minds can connect. So how we respond to anything is our choice. And this is not to minimize the appalling trauma that has been inflicted on people, but I am really leaning into the concept that an event can be traumatic, but it is only traumatizing if it hits the parts of us that are frozen in time. And that we can heal those. Healing is possible, healing is essential, healing is what we need to do now. And then we can choose our responses. And if our responses are based in generosity of spirit, gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, what I would define as the three pillars of the heart mind, we open. And when we open, we are more flexible and we're more resilient. We're more able to find what Sophie Banks calls micro returns. So for me, the presence of the cat is a micro return. I come back to myself, I come back to a place of balance, I come back to a moment of genuine joy in the presence of a living being that has chosen to come and share time with me. Or I could just look up and see the kites circling, or sometimes I just look up and see the sky. But those are responses that I have practiced. It's not an accident that the cat does this. I've put a lot of time and effort into really focusing on feeling something with my heart mind when the cat arrives. And then choosing to step into that. Giving ourselves the space to do that when the whole of the death cult is designed to keep us spinning on a hamster wheel so we don't have time to think is really
Fear is an
hard.
incredibly powerful way of
Totally. Destroying us.
pushing people in a direction that they don't want to go.
Turning us, yes. John Alexander's got a lovely book called Citizens. He used to be in advertising, and he says his abiding memory is of being told on his first day in the job, everybody sees 3,000 adverts a day. Your job is to make your one the one that stands out. He left after a while, but that was 20 years ago. We're seeing a lot more than 3,000 today per day, and they are all designed to capture our attention. Strip mining our attention is part of what the death cult is doing at the moment, but we have a choice to not let that happen. We don't have to switch on our phones. We don't have to take notice of billboards. We don't have to look at what someone else is wearing and decide I need that. We can evolve our own value set, and I think we need to. I think really core to what we need to do is shift the values from scarcity, separation, and powerlessness to agency, sufficiency, connection. And how can I do that moment by moment? Because if I can do that moment by moment, I become more resilient. And as I become more resilient, I become more heart-focused, gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, more connected to the web of life, more able to engage with the people around me with genuine generosity of spirit. And I'm not suggesting this is easy, but it's something that is definitely a practice worth evolving, so that I can look at people taking sledgehammers to liberal democracy and be aware that it did need to collapse. And now what can we bring forward? Because the one thing we can be sure of is this is not predictable. We exist in a hypercomplex system. One of the points of fascism is that it is a desperate, fear-based need to control. And the more and more and more tightly you try to control things, the less likely you are to be able to control anything. And what happens then? What happens if people get together in genuine expressions of decency? And I think part of the pushing everything to the edge, making everything explicit, stripping the mask off the predatory capital death cult, so it's no longer got happy fluffy bunnies and an American dream that was never actually real, or any of the other stuff. It's horrible, but perhaps it needed to happen so that more people could understand that it's a death cult, and we don't have to be part of it. And then what happens? How can I step back from this? Because we all still basically want the power to run, to be water when you switch on the tap, and I want to be able to Zoom with you. We exist in this system. How do we change it from the inside out? And that's an evolving process. But I think it comes at heart to a shift in values, and the values, my values, are what do I live moment by moment by moment.
And I was going to say, every day matters, every hour matters. So it's like calling yourself back into coherence and saying, right, what am I doing with my mind? Am I going into negativity and doom scrolling and just wasting my time, or am I going outside and feeling better because I'm looking at the sky, or knowing that the frogs have spawned overnight, or whatever these things are that can't be bought.
Yes, and give thanks for it. The frog spawns there. How amazing is that? A pulse of gratitude out into the web of life definitely counts and definitely makes a difference. I offer my thanks. I offer my compassion, a whole burst of love for the frog spawn. I offer my joyful curiosity. Oh my God, it's frog spawn. How amazing is that? I wonder what happens next. All of these things spread out into an energetic reality that around which physical things coalesce.
Yes.
And just because our culture doesn't let us really see that doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah. So I've been working with energetic practices for about 40 years, like you. Not like you, but in my own way.
Similar paths.
And, I've practiced different forms of meditation and studied philosophy, both Eastern and Western, and healing practices and shamanic practice, because it's so much about connection and so much about seasonal cycles and the natural world that we actually are alive and move and breathe in.
Yes.
And for me, spirituality has to be connected with that. It can't be something that's so transcendent that it's not grounded. There has to be this vertical access, and that comes down as well as up. And I know this is also possibly outside the realms of permaculture, but there is this curious thing called permanent culture, and I think it's so important that we stretch our concepts and look with greater, I don't know, flexibility at how do we create a genuinely generative world. And for me, the intention of all of this has never solely been self-development for its own sake. So I agree with you that healing the wounded self is fundamental, because it has such a profound effect on how we move through the world, on other people. And but at the same time, we need to, I don't know, I've always felt it was really important to hold a wider vision of why we're doing this than just calming ourselves and becoming more whole for our own sake. And you teach people about dreaming and deep connection with the elements and realities that lie beyond consensual reality, as it's called. And I feel this is a time where people are yearning deeply for connection, for a deeper sort of spiritual understanding of life, and who want to be in service to the world, and to make this other world that's possible really happen. So my question to you, it's not a small one. Where do they start? Where do we start if we're on that journey? Say I was 24 again, what would you say to the younger Maddy?
Or the people who are actually 24.
Yes, exactly.
Up to a point, everybody has to pick their own path.
Yeah.
But I think committing yourself in service to life is universal. It doesn't matter what age you are. And then interpreting what does that mean is yours to do. But I would do that as an absolute baseline. What is it if I commit myself in service to life? And we could spend the next hour just unpicking service to life. If I offer all of myself as a conscious node in the web of life, which is how I would interpret that, then my job is to do the work, to open my heart mind, to be able to connect, to ask what do you want to me and hear the answer. And again, that's something that can be done at any age or stage. And it doesn't mean that we have to wait until things are right. I think there's a tendency, because of the linearity of our culture, to think I'll wait until I've got the right job or the right partner or the right house or the right car or whatever, the right something, until life is perfect. And then I will be able to do what I need to do. And until then, I'm stuck in a crap job with the wrong relationship and in a house that I hate, and I can't do it. And I can see where that comes from, and it's a very alluring set of concepts. But I would say you do it now, whatever your circumstances. And actually, when you commit in service to life, the synchronicities begin to pile up, and pathways forward that you couldn't see because you were locked in a box of limited imagination begin to become available, and your options change. And the things that you thought you were aiming for probably cease to be anywhere on your radar. My experience always is that there's a light at the end of the tunnel that I am thinking I'm going towards, and it is never the light that I get to. Whether I'm writing a book or planning anything, there's always a little bit of a kind of carrot on a stick somewhere, and I'm going, oh, that looks interesting, and then it's gone by the time I'm there. But something else is there that's much better than the original thing. So committing a service to life, absolutely, doing the inner work. It takes time, and it takes prizing our brains away from the limbic hijack that is going on at the moment, and giving time to connecting. You know, even if you're stuck on the 10th floor of a high rise, there is water coming out of your tap. There is rain falling. There is a sky above. There is earth below. You can make the connections to the elements, and then you can begin to hold a conversation with them. I think one of the traumas of our culture is this belief in separability. And instead, what we understand once we begin to do the work is that relationship is reciprocal. It's not just I am connected to the web of life in order to ask it that I can get the things that I feel I need to get to fill the holes inside. It's I connect to the web of life and offer myself in service. And that act of service is in itself a healing process. And then the things that I am asked to do, because this is reciprocal and I've offered myself in service, become ways to grow. And that growing is enthralling and engaging and completely heart explodingly amazing. And my value set shifts as a result. And that it doesn't matter what age you are. That matters. And then healing connections with other people, healing connections within ourselves, healing connections with other people, in order that we can heal the connections with the web of life. And I would say I'm increasingly understanding that helping the younger generations to become the people that they can be. Our education system is designed for the 18th century, and it wasn't very good then. It was basically designed to funnel people into factories. And it's a catastrophe. And that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of fantastic people within the education system, but it's broken. We need a whole new education system. But what can we do with the system as it is to help younger people to be whole, maybe not to take on the traumas in the first place, so that we're becoming the best ancestors that we can be while we're still alive. For those of us of our age, I think Bill Plotkin has a theory that our culture is locked in early adolescence. He is far from alone in this. And people, we are watching the people in charge. We don't have a system. Let me rephrase that. It would be good to have a system that gave power to those with wisdom and wisdom to those with power. The people currently taking power, particularly in the US, but soon over here, do not have wisdom. And the people with wisdom do not have power. How do we shift that to be something different? And so focusing, I still would like to focus on the inner work though, because I think how can we share the wisdom collectively and find ways for wisdom to become a generative force and a self-reinforcing cycle. Probably talked enough.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Because as you were speaking, I was thinking about the concept of energy activism. So by doing this inner work and holding a coherence in a compassionate, curious, joyful way, we do change the situation, the world around us, and we affect other people. We know this by, if you'll spend day after day with someone who's very unwell, and whose energies are very low and they're very depressed, it seeps in, any other human being. It's sort of osmotic. So this deep change can be osmotic for the better. But I think it's really important that we focus on this inner state, and create the osmosis from there, rather than projecting out into the world about what we want to change in an energetic way.
Yes, totally.
Because it's too easy to become polluted by that. And I know I sound a little bit vague here, but I just know from people in the past who've wanted to, rather than, you know, send healing vibes to someone perhaps without their permission, and it often comes from a place of ego and will rather than from a place of compassion. So I think there's this, again, this really difficult balance between, we do the inner work and we hold those states in us and allow the osmosis, but without projecting them out as value systems.
Yeah. Yes. Gosh, yes. I'm remembering early in my shamanic days being amongst people who thought they were going to go and heal Stonehenge.
Yeah. Or
Just,
Trump.
Honestly, or Trump or anything. Yes. It's
or
not,
anyone else.
If someone asks for healing, as long as they understand that we are being the conduit, the hollow bone between the healing of the heart, mind of the universe and this person, and all we're able to do really is ask for help. But I am going to heal person X is an extraordinarily egoic statement, and generally speaking means I'm going to project some energy onto them that they don't want. So being energy aware, once we become energy literate, I think that stops. But it's keeping our egos in sight, understanding that they're there, being kind to the parts of ourselves that feel they need to act out, and perhaps helping them to not feel that they need that, are all part of the inner work, for sure. Where I was going earlier and lost my thread was, how do we become adults and then elders?
Yes.
Because a lot of our culture, we can die and never have got beyond our early adolescence.
Well, to think that our agency is so personal is quite an adolescent place to be. Whereas you mentioned the hollow bone, so being a conduit rather than being a personality that's enacting something is a completely different place. And that to me is part of that eldership, is the capacity to hold energy rather than to try and effect it on.
Yes, and to have that sense of resilience and inner grace and peace, just by being that, it makes a difference. And it's, if you've ever been around someone who's genuinely like that, it's such a restful, relaxing place to be. And imagine again, if a billion of us managed to do that, and it starts with each of us. It starts with one person, and then someone else is in that field, and they can access inner stillness and grace, and then more, and then more. And we knew from COVID that our number of 3 spread something right around the world, and exponential growth is a thing. So aiming for all of us, every single one of us on the planet, to be that isn't a bad aim, I don't think. But the only person I can achieve that with is me.
Yeah.
And I can talk about it a bit with you, and that's good.
So you're a person that's always learning. You're always stretching out your understanding. This is my observation of you, that you're not someone who sits still, and you have this capacity for fluidity. So I sense that when you come to a place where something's not working in your life, you're able to shift to a different track or let something go, and move on. And I just wondered, what are you currently focusing on, and where are you going at the moment with all the wonderful cultural and intellectual influences, as well as your personal relationship with the web?
Good question again, and thank you for the insight. I have to say, it doesn't always look, how I feel from the inside is not how I look from the outside, I would suspect, most of the time.
Well, it's only because
an interesting question.
You were writing a book and you let it go because it was wrong.
Yeah. So then I had 2 months between actually handing in that last draft and no, you cannot touch it ever again, and it actually coming out and starting the whole publishing spin. And in those 2 months, I wrote 15,000 words of the next book. And then launch it, and life was chaotic for a while. And I came back to it this autumn when things began to calm down again. And so my spiritual practice is to ask every day, what do you want of me? And at no point had write this book been there. Whereas with any human power, the instruction to write the book, I thought I'd given up writing. I really wasn't expecting to write another book, and the instruction was clean and clear and 100%, you will write this book now. Okay. And then I finished the book and thought, okay, so you want another book? I can do another. You don't want another book? Really? And there's been no push to write another book at all. And instead, so I just keep asking, and a lot of it is for all of the back end, from the autumn equinox to the winter solstice. I was asking, what do you want of me? I was going up the hill and sitting on the hill going, I'm here, what do you want of me? And there was always a, you need to do this today and this tomorrow, but there wasn't a big write a book thing. So it wasn't, I was short of things to do, but I was a bit confused, I have to say. And then winter solstice, I got a phone call. And between that and New Year, a series of things. And until 3 days ago, I was filling in grant proposals, which I have never filled in a grant proposal in my life. But these are for Thrutopian projects that if I had known they were possible, I would have been out there filling in the grant proposals. And they just literally arrived on my desk. Somebody picked up a phone and said, do you want to do this? Yeah, I do. I really do. And the whole world went, yes, you do. Oh, everything that guides me went, yes, this. Now you do this. And you give it everything you've got, because there's quite a tight deadline. And then another one arose. Fortunately, it was a little bit longer deadline. And again, give it everything. You will polish every single word of this grant proposal until it sparkles. And who knows? We haven't heard the results back yet. But the process was really interesting. And the connections that I made, even just doing that process, were really interesting. And I have no idea where it takes me. If we get the grant proposals, then it's really exciting. If we don't, there's some ideas out there that I think really bear following up. So who knows? Really, I don't know. But the concepts broadly are, I don't think we get through the metacrisis, the polycrisis, unless we collectively yearn for a future that we would be proud to leave behind. We have to have a concept of what that looks and feels like. And that concept has to be everywhere. While we switch on the television and EastEnders is giving us yet more trauma culture, business as usual, the only way you succeed is by stabbing your neighbour in the eye. And I've never watched EastEnders, maybe it isn't like that, but it feels like that when I walk past.
Trauma,
it's horrible. Or Marvel comics, or James Bond, or Game of Thrones, whatever. They're all predicated on the trauma culture's value system, which is not fit for purpose. What happens if we have a different value system? What happens if our newspapers and our parish post newsletter and everything we get on YouTube and poems and songs, what happens if Taylor Swift starts creating Thrutopian songs, or Lady Gaga, or people I've never heard of, because really don't, whatever. Yes, I know nothing about modern culture, but what would happen? And what would happen if the BBC actually had people who understood the nature of the polycrisis and how close we are to climate? Yes, but what happens if they were allowed to not just tell us how bad things are, but to say, yes, the tipping points are right here. We're right at the edge of the cliff, but look, here's a path. And it just requires we all take it. The politicians are not going to do this. Politicians would not get to where they are if they had the capacity to think differently. They're still trying to get GDP growth to happen, which is beyond insane. But what happens if all of us go, guys, you're just irrelevant now, I'm sorry. You just passed your sell-by date. We don't want you. We've got better governance systems. We've got a different way of organizing an economy, because an economy is a human-created thing. We've got a different way of farming that doesn't need industrial agriculture. We're aiming for clean water, clean soil, clean air, clean connections within and between ourselves and the human world. And the more than the human world, sorry. I don't think any of these things is complex, but what if that was our value system? Everything I do is aimed towards clean water, clean air, clean soil, clean connections. If every one of us woke up tomorrow and that was what we aimed for, the world would be a different place by that evening. The systems that are destroying us were made by people. They can be unmade by people, but it would take a new value system and it would take a vision of a different future. So these two grant proposals were both different ways of creating concepts out in the world that help people to understand that it's not easier to imagine the total extinction of all life on Earth than it is to imagine an end to capitalism. It may seem easier to you, but it's not. There's other options. So does that answer the question that you asked?
Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you.
I have one last question, Manda. What brings you joy, and what nurtures and fires the love that you have for life?
Oh, well, the cat. Seriously.
Absolutely.
But
that's
everything,
fine.
you know, I have very intentionally set myself a goal of falling in love with living. And at the moment, I am completely, wholeheartedly, heartburstingly in love with the process of being alive. But I feed that. I feed it every time there's a moment of wonder, of a tree, a leaf falls from a tree and it's an amazing thing, or there's a cloudburst and the rain is pouring down. It's like, God, the water falls from the sky. How amazing is that? Or I get to talk to Maddy Harland, editor of Permaculture magazine. How utterly amazing is that? Finding the joy in the things that might seem mundane, but I promise you, this was our last 5 minutes on Earth. We'd be like, my goodness, I get to talk to you. Isn't that astonishing?
Talk about love.
Yeah. Yeah. Being in love with the process of being alive.
Because it's so
is
precious.
Magical. It is. It is utterly miraculous. Totally miraculous. And this might be our only chance. I don't know that it is, but it's in this body with this configuration of cells. This moment is the only time we get to do this, and I am going to live it with everything I've got. That the core. Fall in love with being alive. See where that takes you. That's critical and crucial and amazing, and in itself is a wonderful thing.
And a huge form of activism.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
What we love, we want to nurture and care for.
Yes.
And I always have a thing with permaculture, that permaculture talks about earth care, and it's sort of about like us caring for the earth. But we also have to reverse that we are so held and cared for in under this sky, but below the branches of the tree, with our feet on the earth. And we are deeply held if we have the capacity to open to that. And that is a deeply reassuring and joyous place to be as well.
Yeah. Yes. And letting go into that.
Yeah.
Is
and going back to gratitude, or always such a deep wisdom.
Yeah.
Even in times of utter desolation, gratitude is like the rope out of the deep dark hole.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Yes. Totally.
Well, Manda, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been an honor.
Pleasure.
Yes. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I look forward to the feedback.
Yeah, me too.